Hello, everybody, and welcome in to Esports Weekly. Hope you had a wonderful break after the midseason invitational. I know we did, but I'm also equally excited to get right back into the action. That's what you're here to see today on Esports Weekly. I'm Ryan Bailey. I'll be your host as per usual. And you may have heard from a little birdie or on Twitter, that's the birdie joke, that we're doing roster reveals right here on Esports Weekly really soon. In fact, we've got one commercial break and then we'll get right into the roster reveal, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But that doesn't mean that we're done right after that. We've still got SPL games to cover. SCL and SML have already kicked off, so we've got to get into that. We've got to get a deep dive into the Renegades win, of course, at the Midseason Invitational. And I want to start at the Midseason Invitational because this is one of those format-defining tournaments. I mean, this is the second biggest tournament of the year, and Renegades came in and kind of waxed it. And I know we did our deep dive last week, but I want to kind of recap and look at what we may have internalized from the Midseason Invitational. What did we learn, besides the fact that Renegades are really strong? And that's that teamwork still is the end-all be-all of winning a championship in competitive Smite. You have to work well as a team. Just being talented individually is not going to get the job done. Ask PK and Dignitas. They didn't win a single game against the Renegades. Or Splice, for that matter, didn't win a single game against the Renegades. So with that in mind, with us thinking, okay, teamwork is where it's all going to be, what do we draw from that conclusion? It's that getting your rosters correct going into Phase 2 is going to be very important. And also that I think that you can't count out the bottom-end teams. If the most important thing in the entire game right now is your teamwork, is the way that you play the map and understand each other as teammates, then why can't a team like Trifecta or Space Station or Luminosity make a big jump in the second half of the season? Why can't SK Gaming get hot again as they really work well together? And of course, yes, playing the right gods, understanding the meta, understanding how to abuse the map, all of those things are critical. But I think it's been proven that at this level, if the 6th seed coming into a tournament, the 6 out of 10 of the SPL teams is going to come in and not drop a single game, and it's because of their teamwork and the way they play the map. If the meta comes around and all of a sudden it kind of favors the way that Space Station plays, why can't they be a top favorite going into the World Championships? It's an exciting time. If you're a fan of just about any team, the only fans that might be disappointed with this style of play and the way that the SPL is kind of shaken down up until this point are the ones that usually are used to having their teams dominate. You know, the old PK fans, you know, the teams that used to root for Energy and the old E United roster, the ones that used to dominate their region. You'd feel really good normally about them going into tournaments. Can you now? I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out on that front. That's what makes the SPL just so exciting. Let's take a look at what we've got for our Week 1 schedule. We're going to ease our toe into the SPL water. Only one game each day this week, starting at 11 a.m. We've got Dignitas and Space Station on Thursday, and then Space Station and Splice on Friday. I was just saying, maybe Space Station can be a team that turns it around in the second half. Well, they've got a tough one to start, that's for sure. Dignitas and Splice, two very difficult opponents right off the bat. This is what we saw in the last phase, but don't forget, it all carries over. All of these games still count. So even though Rival has a very disappointing MSI, they're still your number 1 seed in the SPL. We're not going back to 0-0 as we usually do in between phases. Luminosity Gaming, hey, here's a hint. They made some roster changes because they're number 10 and didn't win a single set. I don't know that they'll be number 10 for much longer. LG looking much stronger, I think, with their new roster. We've got a couple other changes, of course. Splice, and we know that they need a new solo laner. Baskin is gone. He just played with Armada, so you know he's out of the SPL. Let's see what they've got going on. Don't have to wait much longer. We'll be going over roster changes in just a little bit. But first, if you missed what may have happened at MSI or you just want a little bit more detail from the Masters themselves, we got a chance to sit down and talk to Raffer earlier on last week. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the Renegades midseason invitational victory.
So we're like 6 or 7 weeks into the season, and I'm still looking around. Where are Renegades? They're not here. We still don't have a whole team for the SPL to come in and play.
And they show up and they look good right away. And that's not to be unexpected. There was no part of me that thought they were going to have a lukewarm entrance. It was either going to be red hot or freezing cold. They were going to lose every game or win every game. I didn't think it was going to be anything in between.
Our mentality with the late start to the SPL was kind of rough because we only scrimmed, I'd say Simplicity was our best scrims. Our losses were on us kind of trolling or doing something wrong. And then the odd time they'd do something like really amazing, we'd be like, right, we'll take that. That's our strat now.
They come out their very first week and beat Dig, who are undefeated. Apparently, that break did not slow them down too much.
There's obviously 9 other teams in the SPL. This one team comes out late and we end up smacking them. Like, what has just hit us? What is this strat? And that's obviously the benefits are coming late, but then the negatives are we're getting smacked by stuff we've not seen. So we just thought, go all in. Do our best, try and take Dignitas out. So we obviously took away their undefeated title. I mean, obviously, E United taking it later on as well, but just in case, because I know Emil likes to troll, so just take that away, yeah.
They give Dig their first loss, and now I'm looking pretty dumb because I really didn't believe in this squad yet. They hadn't proven anything to me.
And in that moment, you know, we love to overreact to stuff. They're the best team now, right? They beat the best team, transit property, whatever you want to say. And then they're kind of up and down, right? They win that set, they lose some they should win, they win some they should lose. You don't really know what Renegades are gonna get.
I am stubborn with my assessments most of the time. I really felt like Renegades was a middle of the pack team. They start to play like it towards the back half. I mean, they look okay against most of the teams they should. They get 3-0'd by PK. That's not a good sign. They kind of stumble into 6th seed for MSI, right about where I expect. But they're a dark horse. They're a team that really, really can surprise you if you're not prepped for them.
And a lot of the pros are kind of rumbling about Renegades, but you still haven't seen it yet, so you're not sure.
But to be honest with you, I didn't think they really had a shot at beating PK. I thought PK was looking so good coming in MSI. They had played so well. That was a team that I expected to win.
PK kind of surprised us, like one of those strats where we just couldn't kill any of their gods. And I feel like they kind of tried to do it at MSI again, but we were more prepared because they did it throughout the split. They 3-0'd us, and that wasn't a worry. Like, the only team I was scared of at MSI was Splice and Rival. They were the 2 teams I was scared of. The rest I were confident against. Like, we go against PK, they're probably just as confident. They think, we 3-0'd them in the season, it's no problem. Well, surprise hit them, didn't they? You know, came in overconfident, and that's what happened.
These guys are the real deal. I mean, they really have a chance, but not against Splice. I mean, Splice, I hear they're scrim partnering. I mean, Splice has got it all figured out. They know all their picks. They've got to have come up with some sort of strategy. And then Renegades just really embarrassed Splice on Friday as well.
And then they just win the whole thing. Just a big run, never losing even a game.
They look a little bit different. They've got Cherry on different picks. That's a good look for them, but Dardes is still playing the same things in mid. He looks great on them, but what's gonna happen when we just devote our entire comp to killing on her mid?
And he's on a hyper carry at the moment. And to win the dispersal. Dodge and leave, still has yet to be hit by a basic. The stun comes up again. Exorcism gets one.
I'm a beast, let's go.
That's a team fight ultimate. That's a team fight ultimate. Dardes takes down Ataraxia.
Mario, great sash stun. Cyclone spin down to the ring bounce, and Venedu's gonna be next.
Cherry gets to the backhand of Venedu, and Dardes gets the kill with a Death of Fury. Falling down here unless his jukes can save him.
Scream has to use the bees, and Rapper right there, right on time with the category.
There was no escape. Cherry went to the back line, and there's Rapper with this peel and support that was required to keep Cherry alive.
Venedu gonna be first blood, but Baskin right behind him, or they actually switch. Looking for the Desert Fury, and they find Venedu, and the Fountain Scream goes down as well. Looking good for the Renegades.
It is good for the Renegades. It's 3-0. It's been 3-0 or 2-0 all week long. And Renegades have done what they came here to do. They win the tournament undefeated. And my oh my, there's a target on their back heading into phase 2.
Victory was so sweet because of the players. Like, we have Cherry, Dardes, Nika. Just wanted those 3 boys to really, really get that W.
This is a world championship caliber team without a doubt. I think they'll still finish 4th or 5th in the regular season because they aren't really a regular season squad. But when it comes to lands, Rapper is the best land player of all time at this point. I'm willing to put my name on that one. I mean, the guy's won 2 world championships, and the Renegades are the real deal. And to be honest, I really wouldn't have said that the week before MSI, but how can you not after how well they played? These guys could really win worlds.
Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. It's the time that you've all been waiting for, the roster reveal moments for Phase 2. And to do it with me here on the desk, we've got John Finch joining us.
Hey.
Finch, you want to talk about, I don't know, any of these teams that made roster changes?
I mean, none of them are particularly exciting, so I mean, do we have to? What's next on your page? Maybe we can go to that.
Yeah,
or something.
we're gonna
Is it
talk
all
to-
us again this week, by the way? Someone else
No,
is here,
someone
right?
else, yeah, everyone
Okay,
else is here.
good.
We got
Thank
everybody
goodness.
back in the
Cool.
saddle for this show. We don't have to carry it just by ourselves. We'll carry the most important part,
Sure.
which is the rosters. Let's start with the one that we knew was coming, and,
Right.
that's Splice. We knew Baskin was going to be out. There was a lot of talk about, are they going to try and make a trade happen, try and get some of these established players? That was kind of the idea, I thought, by bringing Baskin on. But ultimately, they go with the spot that we kind of thought would fill there,
Right.
and it will be Solo or Troll playing with Splice here in Phase 2.
And I actually do think this is exciting. As long as the whole team can mesh with him, Solar Troll's clearly a strong player. He's shown that to us every time that he's played. There was obviously some cracks that were showing when he subbed in for them earlier on. They're not entirely unfamiliar to this guy. He played with Splice back towards the beginning of the phase when Divios wasn't there and they weren't quite sure what they're going to be doing. And there were some times when he looked a bit hesitant, which isn't Solar Troll. We know that's not that guy. There's some times he looked a bit lost. We know he knows how to play it. It's all he does. So as long as they can get that together, this team can all be on the same page. I think this is a big pickup for these guys. Splice are still scary.
Yeah, I mean, look, you lose Baskin, your team gets worse.
Yes.
That is an unequivocal truth in the universe. How much worse do you think Splice is with Solo Ritual? With nothing against him.
Exactly,
It's just that Baskin is.
We would be saying that with X, and X equals all other players. Yes,
Right, exactly right.
Yeah.
How much worse do you think Splice is? Do you think they're still a Worlds contender?
I do think that this is still a top team. I think that their ceiling is a lot brought down, right? I mean, Baskin just adds a ton of solo potential by himself win condition. I think Solo Troll can do that too, but this team's had to play a little bit more like Renegades instead of like maybe someone like Knights that can just get it done of individual play. They're going to have to play as a really well-oiled five-man machine, I think, if they're going to want to win with the roster as constituted. Remember, they still have tons of win conditions. I'm still confident in Aurora,
Sure.
Cyclone, Spin, Scream in any given moment. Really, SOT doesn't have to play Baskin level, I don't think, for this team to be successful.
I think that's a good point. And the one concern that I may have is, don't forget, Solo Ritual's a little bit of a younger guy.
He is,
For,
yeah.
moving out to Atlanta, being with your boys all the time. I remember what it's like when I first went to college and you have all that freedom.
Sure.
You've got to make sure that you're locked in, but I'm sure with a team like this, Aurora's going to keep him in line.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk Luminosity, because that's the other team that I teased at the top of the show. We know
they are
that,
very different.
yeah, they start off 0-9 in the first phase, and they make some pretty big changes. I said last week on Esports Weekly, Kiki out of support, still on the team. When it came time that night for rosters to be in at midnight, that was no longer the case. Kiki Ocean's out,
Yeah.
Ionic Snoopy in, and I did get word that it will be Snoopy in the mid lane to start off with at least, and Ionic in Joshi and ADC, Ionic support. How much better do you think this makes LG?
It's tough for me because I do like Kiki a lot, and I think he's a strong player. And I said on the show last week when I thought that he was out, that if Kiki left, that was a mistake for that team. He wasn't the problem. But I don't know, man. I think the way this team is constituted, they instantly shoot up to me 2 or 3 spots. I really think that's how strong that Snoopy is as a player. I think Ionic adds a lot for them, and I think they're right to keep Joshi in that role for what it's worth. He has actually looked really strong for this team. I thought he was the strongest player on it performance-wise before this shift. So as long as they can keep that level of play for him, you trust Snoopy and the Ionic to elevate this team a little bit in that mid role for them, and then the support role, obviously. And then it sounded like, from what you're saying, still Zelia there for them on this team.
Correct.
And then Lasbra as well, right, in the jungle role for them. They've actually got a ton of talent on this LG team. I've actually got pretty high hopes for them to be able to do much better than no wins like we saw.
Do you like this idea to take Snoopy out of the role where he looked so good? I mean, he really bodied Arkil even.
Yeah.
And now you put him in the mid lane. Joshi did experiment with going mid a little bit last phase. Do you think this is the right opening configuration for LG?
I do think so. I understand that it hurts them to not have Snoopy in that main role. He has a lot of potential, but you consider what you're losing, keep Josh at the level he showed us, and then I trust Snoopy to be a pretty good mid laner too. I think they've got a good shot.
So with Ionic gone and on the Luminosity, we knew the Trifecta was making changes. We announced that Ionic was out last week, and it is Mineral stepping in and signed with this Trifecta roster. Mineral definitely has a lot of experience at the minor league level.
Yeah.
Ionic is kind of the other end, where he's got the legacy, kind of, as a longtime player, a former superstar in every sense of the word, and now you're getting him after all that experience. Mineral, this is one of his first experiences at the top level. How do you think he meshes with this Trifecta roster?
I think there's a good chance Mineral can do well, but this one has me probably the least excited out of all the ones that we've seen, if I'm being honest, in terms of the potential for the output here. Mineral has every chance to come in and prove me wrong here in the doubting that I'm having for him, but I think there's better support talent in the minor league still right now, right? Gino comes to mind for me as someone who I think is very strong for the and Genetics as well. Excuse me. So I mean, there's tons of that talent there. It's just that can Mineral come in and show us that he should be in that spot over the rest of some of those guys. Now there might be even a little bit more to it. Does he fit really well with Trifecta? Do they like playing with this guy? That stuff matters a lot. I mean, consider the way that things went down for Splice earlier in the league. Having a team you can keep together and they're all happy playing together is huge. Mineral fits that bill, then this is the right play.
And don't forget that Wowie spent all last year at the minor league level, played against Mineral. I can't recall if they played together, but you imagine those two were very familiar with one another one way or another. And Trifecta, this is not the only change that they've made, though it is the only change with their players. Trifecta as the org is now going to be Obey Alliance. Yeah, that Obey Alliance. Shook kind of, I don't know the details. I'm not a business guy by any stretch of the word, but now we'll be playing underneath the Obey tag.
Right.
It's exciting. I mean, Obey is a long-time Smite fans. Love Obey.
Dare I say?
yeah, that's the way it is. In fact, we got a little sizzle video here for you, basically, of Obey returning to the SPL. Let's take a look.
So they will not find the kill, but Wowie happily taking the trade. EI Jutsu under the tower and paid a price in terms of HP. Zero comes. Zop has the ultimate knock-up into the double kill.
Dan's going to do him a favor and bring Moswell back into melee range, but this could actually work out better for Moswell. He turns it around, water
Flies into the sky, and big man Ting's trying to get jumped on. Weak Daddy.
Might even want more. Leaking goes up into the sky, very telegraphed, but there's not much Sam can do. The knock-up lands. Ducky finds the double. Much better so far.
So break back out those Obey Alliance, little icons and your UIs and your awards and that kind of stuff, because they are back in the SMITEPro League taking over that Trifecta roster. Before we go, Finch, we are running out of time. Of the three changes, Solar Troll in for Splice in the solo lane, Ionic and Snoopy replace Oceans and Kiki on Luminosity, and Mineral replacing Ionic on Trifecta, now Obey. Which of these teams are you most excited about?
It's got to be LG for me, man. I mean, they're almost a functionally different team here now. They've got the most room for improvement. I'm expecting a lot of big things out of this LG team.
I agree with you. I think it's the most room for change, basically, there for them, and they've got room to change. They started off 0-9 in Phase 1. Thank you, Finch, for joining us and talking some rosters. Of course, as I mentioned, we've got plenty to go over still. We've got to get into our first deep dive of SPL Phase 2. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Dignitas had a very successful Phase 1 during the regular season and a not-so-successful MSI run, so we've got to see how they can bounce back. And we'll start it off with Space Station tomorrow. So to do that, we've got Dignitas correspondent Graham Hinduman Hadfield joining us here on the show.
Hello.
Graham, welcome in.
Thank you.
Look, do you agree with my assessment that MSI was disappointing for Dignitas?
Biggie's version of that was the same way. He feels the same way about it. I had a chance to talk to the Dig boys this past couple of weeks about, like, hey, how's things been going and how they felt about the first phase and what happened at MSI too. They're not happy, Ryan. They feel like their performance overall kind of slipped. It was a misunderstanding of what happened. They came into it, as they said, mid-season. Sorry, they weren't expecting to do as well as they did at MSI. They were out of practice and they lost a bit of focus, and they're trying to work on that now going into the second phase. Start of the year, they feel like their performance at the start, they got off to a really good start, as we saw from Dignitas, and they were almost unstoppable until towards the end of the year, I'd say, because more and more games got tighter and tighter as time went on.
Right.
And they said themselves, listen, we changed too much about how we played overall in terms of that split. We experimented too much and we didn't stick to what has been working for us time and time again. So their plan really overall for the second split is now to, well, go back to where they started things, where things were working, and then stick to those things instead of changing things up so much and experimenting too much.
What do you think those kind of knobs of success are for Dignitas? What do you think that they're referring to when they're talking about getting back to what made us successful?
Honestly, I think a lot of what Biggie was saying to me was to do with their picks and bans more than anything else in terms of the god selections. They were a bit more free-flowing in terms of experimenting with different picks and different roles to help them out. But in the grand scheme of things, that kind of backfired a little bit. They were a bit too much open, and they weren't as dialed in on how the game would play, because, you know, you put one god in a role, it's going to change the dynamic completely based off a different one. Khepri versus, I don't know, Khepri versus Horus is a big difference in the terms of the playstyle that god's going to bring to you.
Sure.
And there was a lot of experimentation from Dignitas during that first phase. But I'm okay with that, Ryan. Like, I'm okay with the experimentation. It's the first phase. They were so far in the lead by the start of it. They'd beaten some of the big-name teams in the first few weeks. That they weren't resting on laurels. They were trying to improve themselves. And all the talk I've had from this team through the whole of Dignitas' first phase was, listen, we know we're doing well right now, but we've still got things to work on, and we're not improving as fast. And that's all I've said about Dignitas through the first phase. Then comes to MSI. It doesn't go as planned for them. They would have obviously loved to have won it and expected to do much better than they did. But now they're like, hey, everything we said happened. This is what's wrong. And they're still just straight up about themselves of like where they're at in terms of position. That I've got such high hopes for Dignitas on the tail end of the season.
I think it's a funny sort of irony almost that they feel like they got a little bit too creative and too all over the place when the last 2 years, a big criticism of this team was that they were too stuck in their ways. They did the same thing every single game. Do you think that the more wide open nature of Season 6 and this new roster almost caught them off guard in that sense?
I think the one thing that we saw from them, honestly, Ryan, was the fact that they did do that. They did experiment more because they had the ability to do so without being as stagnant as they were the year before. But that has backfired, as you said, because they're like, hey, look at all this freedom. Look at all these different gods we can play. And then they got themselves in a situation where they're just messing around too much almost.
So how do they rein that in against Space Station in particular? Because you know Space Station's going to come out of the gates hungry.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. Like, as I said to Biggie, I'm like, what's your plans for Space Station this week? What are you going to do? And like, listen, we're not going to mess around. We respect them. They've had their problems, but if you look at these 6 players on paper as a whole unit, this is a good team. And sure, you know, in the league standpoint, Space Station haven't been great, but they're coming out themselves. They're not going to be experimenting. This is what Biggie said. We won't be experimenting, and we've got a point to prove after how the MSI week went. So these guys, I think, have their head screwed on, but I know they're still in the back of their minds like, what is SSG going to bring out? Because they've got so much to do this year.
That is true, and don't forget, this is the first time we'll see SPL play on the midseason patch.
Yep.
Do you think this is a team that adjusts well to all these new options and items and gods that got changed?
I think the short answer, yes. The reason we know that is because of how the start of Phase 1 went. They were the team that came out the gate straight away. Those first couple of weeks beating the teams like Rival, you know, the big boys that we expected to do well, PK Knights.
Sure.
Like, PK Knights, it's the same thing, right? Just Knights.
The ATM machine, PK Knights.
Pittsburgh Knights is what I said. PK
That's
Knights.
Good.
But yeah, those guys, like they beat those early on, so they adapted to the Season 6 meta very, very quickly.
Sure.
The problem is that then they started experimenting too far. So a mid-season update means there's new changes, which means they should be good on the creative again, and then once they find that rhythm, hold it.
My thing is, though, that, I mean, you look at the gods that got changed that everybody's talking about, right? I mean, Hurlwind, Isis feels like a god that's really in his wheelhouse.
Sure.
But is Cuvo a really big Thor player? Never really has been in his career.
Yeah, he has.
I mean, he played it, but it's not been a signature pick for him. I think of more Hun Bats with him.
I agree, but when we talk about Thor in general, I mean, it was really only Season 1, Season 2 that he really had a heyday.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people got burnt out on him, remembers Thor and thinks he's been around forever, but he's not. It was really Season 1, Season 2. And Cuvo was just as good. Cuvo was just as good in Season 1 and Season 2 and played that god. His Thor is in the god pool.
Okay.
It's not something that he's going to go to time and time again, but he can play Thor if he needs to.
Okay.
And with the changes to Thor, I think he's going to be a top pick, top ban. We've not even spoken about the fact there's an additional ban yet.
That's true.
And that adds in.
That is. And normally I think that would really hurt a team like Dignitas. Last 2 years, that would have really hurt them. This year, maybe not quite as much. If anyone's playing Nike on this team, it's got to be Trix, right?
Tricks. I think Variety could probably in the wouldn't surprise me to see
it's not
Variety in
Jean
it.
Kui, though. I mean, you know.
Well, but Variety ran a lot of Sobek for 2 years and did quite well on that. So a more defensive late game god, Nike, not a bad choice.
Could be pretty solid, Graham. Thanks for joining us to talk about Team Dignitas. As we mentioned, Space Station Gaming want to come out of the gates hot. They've got a lot of talent, but have a lot of ground to make up in Phase 2. We'll talk to Tom Battinger on the other side about how Space Station's feeling. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Space Station Gaming have a tough doubleheader to start Phase 2. Not exactly what the doctor ordered after a little bit of a disappointing Phase 1, or maybe it is. We've got Tom Baddinger joining us, the Space Station Gaming correspondent, to go over that. Tom, do you think that this sort of start is a good thing for Space Station or a bad thing?
Oh, man, it's a bad thing. It's just straight up a bad thing. There's no way that I can twist this into being something better than it is. By the way, thank you for inviting me to this show. Fantastic to see you again.
Yeah.
How was your 2 weeks?
It was very nice. It was very nice to, MSI, there's a lot of stuff going on. You've got back and forth. A nice 2-week break, and I'm revitalized, man. This plus the midseason patch, I've been having a lot of fun on Smite.
That's what it is for me. The midseason patch is a lot of fun to play Smite and to watch Smite. Phase 2, we're going to have the more of the bans, and I think that's going to be an important point for me talking about Space Station going forward, because nothing playing traditional Smite has worked yet. So if they can't fix it, maybe the changes to the game will fix it. I'm being a little glib, but at the end of the day, this team, I had asked for drastic changes. Sino has come in and has not been, the fix-all, end-all, be-all, which nobody is supposed to be at the end of the day. One player is not supposed to drastically change everything, but, something has to give. 2 weeks in between, some changes to the band structure. Maybe picks and bans have always been Space Station Gaming's, that crew, whatever team name it has been, kind of their Achilles heel. Maybe this will amplify them, giving them some extra wiggle room in that phase of the game. I don't know. Space Station Gaming, two double headers, like you said. 2 big double headers, like you said. Not a great place to start, like I said.
Feels a little bit bad that Annenster moves out of the jungle and then Thor becomes the best jungler potentially, right? Like, that's got to hurt at least a little bit.
Yeah, it hurts, don't it?
We talking Thor mid these days,
No.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe a
So
little bit.
something to keep an eye on potentially for Space Station Gaming. Let's start with what we've got for them first, which is tomorrow up against Team Dignitas. We just heard Graham talk about how Dignitas has a lot to prove as well. I don't know that that's the type of dig you want to run into necessarily as a motivated, refocused Team Dignitas.
No.
You just seem very down on the Space Station roster. Is that the way you feel going into Phase 2?
And I say this, yeah, unfortunately, man. It's a team of great guys and everything, but the game just hasn't gone in their direction. I think it's larger. I think it's a much larger conversation than let's fix our objective secure. I think it's a much larger conversation than let's make sure we get to red buff on time. I think it's positioning for multiple members. I think that the conversations that are supposed to be being had aren't being had. The change to Sino happened in the latter portion of Phase 1, so if you are looking for a silver lining or a potential olive branch to grab onto right now, both of me misusing idioms. If you're looking for something positive about Space Station, it's the fact that the grand Sino experiment has not completed its course. When you grab this new player, you don't say, well, it's been 3 weeks, I guess it's done. There is some more time. The 2-week break, especially not coming to LAN, is a big deal. The positive to grab here is that it's still a question mark. Where I'm coming from, though, Ryan, a question mark is not usually where I want my most positive bullet point to be.
No, it isn't, but when you've not done very well, it's better than a period of this is not working. You know what I mean? I think that's where you're going to. So let's lean into the Dignitas matchup. Dignitas, Renegades gave you the blueprint on how to dismantle them, right? They showed you how to clean sweep Dig. Do you think that what Renegades did is applicable here for Space Station, or do you think they need to go with a different strategy?
To a certain extent, I think that they can definitely lean on Sino to play like Cherio, right? Where you can be the hard carry, you can shift into more of a facilitation role, and having the jungle being amorphous is a key to what Renegades do. Another key to what Renegades do is that support position. And Jeff Hindla plays a very different style. And, listen, I exist on the internet. I see Twitter. I see Reddit. I see all these conversations. I am not going to come up here on this table and say that Jeff Hindla is the problem on this team. What I am going to say is that his play style cannot... You can't do what Renegades do. So you have to approach the game in a different way. Play through Jeff, probably not the option. Have Jeff help mid and jungle. Maybe we're talking.
Could be the key potentially for Space Station Gaming. Let's see what every other caster thinks about this potential matchup and which way it's going to go. That's a lot of yellow and gold, but yellow, gold and black, I suppose. But that's the wrong ones if you're looking for Space Station Gaming. They've got another matchup then, of course, on Friday up against Splice, and this is one that I'm excited for just because it's Venenu versus the old squad. It's Sino versus the old squad. This is a game that it looked like Space Station was going to win in Phase 1 and then choked it away a little bit. But that means that they had the blueprint, right? And maybe they can learn something. Plus, Solo Patrol's first set for them. Do you think this is a winnable set for them?
I think this is more winnable than the Dignitas set, but by no means is it set in stone. You mentioned this. You mentioned the changeup over there on the solo lane. That's a big deal. Obviously, that's one of the big things that we're talking about. And so, with that in mind, will that be the Achilles heel that SSG can take advantage of? Maybe, but again, this is for Space Station Gaming, their task is internal. A lot of times when you're looking at teams struggling, you look towards the opposition and you say, well, we're a fast team, they're a slow team, let's take advantage of that. Or you say, we're an end game team, they're an early game team, let's take advantage of that. Space Station Gaming have to turn their cameras inward and say, what is our problem? Because you can't move on until you identify the issue with the squad itself.
Makes a little bit of sense. And they've got 2 tough sets in order to try and do that, but the phase, I mean, the records carry over. That hurts Space Station for sure, but they weren't that far from 6th seed. Don't forget, they went into the last week still able to qualify for the Midseason Invitational. It's not like they're completely dead in the water. They went 0-9. You know, it's not one of those situations.
Not at all. And again, you were talking about how I'm looking at these matches. If I'm Coach F. This is the classroom. You are not expected to beat Dignitas, and if you beat Splice, we'll throw an ice cream party. At the end of the day, this is to gather information, watch the VOD, and say, there, you're out of position at 225. There, you missed the execution at 37 minutes, and there, you lost because of these reasons. Show me week 3 and 4. I'll come back here in 2 weeks and tell you what these classroom moments have meant, but it's up to Space Station to show us what these classroom moments will give us in the win column.
Personally, always more of a fan of pizza parties. Ice cream parties, they get a little sticky. You know, have to hold the ice cream bar. It's a lot easier.
I don't really like ice cream, but...
well, that's much weirder than my take. Tom, thanks very much for joining us, talking about some Space
right.
Station Gaming. Splice, on the other hand, they've got something to prove as well. With Baskin out, are they still a top contender? We've got Taco coming in to talk about it right after this. Welcome back to Esports Weekly. We already went over Splice's roster change at the very top. If you're just joining us, Solo or Troll will be replacing Baskin in the solo lane for the defending world champions. And how will that impact them going up against Space Station Gaming? We've got Taco in the building, our Splice correspondent. Taco, talk to me about this acquisition of Solo or Troll. It seemed like a no-brainer to a lot of the fans and that kind of stuff, but why didn't it happen earlier? My understanding is it went pretty close to the deadline.
It was fairly close to the deadline. There is a little bit of behind-the-scenes works that I don't want to get too in-depth on because
Sure.
you know that certain things are left to the privacy of the team. But ultimately, Splice was just trying to find the proper fit. And Solo or Troll, while he has already performed with the team prior to them making the decision, it was still a little bit shaky because you have to keep in mind he is relatively young,
Sure.
being only 16 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and that can be a really big decision to factor in for having somebody so young into the team as far as, you know, team maturity is concerned. But ultimately, I think that they're pretty satisfied with their decision, and they also are under the understanding that, I mean, Solo or Troll, he's already got such a versatile god pull. He's displayed it on numerous occasions, both in minor league and in pro level play. The only thing he really needs at this stage is a little bit more experience, and that's exactly what Splice is going to provide him with.
Do you think that Solo or Troll's performance at the Midseason Invitational against Rival in particular is one that helped his case to get picked up?
I don't think it necessarily was the deciding factor for Solo or Troll getting picked up, but I think ultimately Splice kind of just realized that if they needed someone who could kind of pseudo what Baskin was doing, because Baskin was mostly just there to fill in for the team with a god pull that would allow them to have a little bit more wiggle room, essentially, because Splice, they're not conventional. They like
Sure.
creating their own metas, and Solo or Troll is just going to continue factoring into that.
I asked Finch this at the beginning of the show when we were going over all these roster changes, how this affects Splice's ceiling. Are they still a world championship contender with Solo or Troll in the solo lane? How do you feel about that question?
I think, if anything, it might actually open things up even more so for Splice, because Solo or Troll, he's just so young in his own pro career at this phase that I think that this is really only the beginning for him.
Maybe can be molded almost
Yes.
into Scream's ideal solo laner. You know, Benji Jr. over here.
I don't know if you can be an ideal solo laner for Scream, man. That's asking for a lot.
Listen, man, Scream's brain power is capable of anything. I've been convinced of that. Let's talk about their matchup now up against Space Station Gaming. We just talked to Tom, and he was saying that Space Station, he's not particularly high on this team right now. What are Splice's feelings going into this matchup?
I think this is probably one of the best matchups that Splice could have gotten, especially for having Solar Troll now going to be the permanent fill-in for their team, because Solar Troll is a little bit familiar with Cyno, but more importantly, the entirety of Splice is extremely familiar with Cyno and his playstyle, and it just doesn't really seem as though Space Station has really blended all that well as of late, or at least from what we saw towards the tail end of Phase 1. It seemed like there was still a little bit of a disconnect between Ananster and Cyno, so I think it'll be a good test phase for Splice here in this set.
I just think that when you look back at how this set played out in Phase 1, normally I would agree with you that Splice should be a pretty heavy favorite here, but Space Station looked very, very good in that set. It took a big comeback from Splice in order to win that set. Do you think that almost losing in Phase 1 helps them be even better here in Phase 2?
I think it helps them to understand a little bit more of their mistakes and kind of internalize those. Keep in mind, all of these teams have had a decent amount of time since the end of MSI to kind of revamp and readjust for entering Phase 2.
Let's take a look at and see what all the other casters really feel about this matchup, because I imagine it's going to be pretty heavily Splice. It's hard to vote for Space Station right now against a top-tier contender, but I do think that thinking these two sets are foregone conclusions could be a potential mistake.
I wouldn't call it a guarantee either direction. I think that there is still ample room for either side to kind of pull the rug out from the other. Splice is obviously riding into this one a little bit higher than Space Station, and I think that that's also probably the public perception as well, and especially since Space Station has kind of failed to perform. But the one big thing I will give to Splice is that it was a reverse sweep. Like that's the biggest standpoint here, and if Splice can hold on through 3 games continuously, that's kind of tough for Space Station, I think, to come into this for.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because the other team that you've been covering all year has been Luminosity. 0-9 through the first phase. They make a couple changes, Snoopy and Eonic in. How do you feel about this team now? Do you think they're improved?
If ever so slightly. I don't think that looking at things on paper, it's enough to sell me on this team jumping automatically from last place to middle of the pack.
Something that still needs a little bit of time in the oven potentially, but I don't know. I think that it's the team that made the most drastic changes.
It's just seeing Snoopy when he's such a high-ranking ADC, but now you're taking him from his main role into the mid lane. That feels a little bit weird to me. I think, if anything, maybe Luminosity should consider switching up Joshi and Snoopy.
Okay, something to keep an eye on for sure. I'm sure we'll be talking plenty about that roster change with you when it's Luminosity's time to play. I think their first game is week 3, so keep your eye tuned if you're an LG fan there. Taco, thank you very much for joining us to talk about some Splice and their changes. We sat down with Raffer a little bit ago, and we got a great video about his old team in order to get a look at some of his previous victories. But that's on the other side, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with that one. Welcome back, everybody. Esports Weekly continuing now. As I mentioned before we went to break, Raffer, you may have seen our video at the very top of the show about how winning with this Renegades team at the Midseason Invitational felt a little bit sweeter than the rest, and that got us thinking. Let's talk about the rest. The man's a 2-time world champion, and you can't forget about that. In fact, we had Anatoly sit down with him not too long ago and talk about their Season 3 victory over Obey. Let's take a look.
I'm here with Raffer, support for Renegades. Tell me a little bit about this game you chose and what the meaning is to you.
So this set's a good one. It's a back and forth action. It's perfect for the spectators. Very stressful for the players. You know, like for myself. And it was good. It was a good set. We should have lost, but makes it even better. You know, we should have lost and we won.
It feels like it set the tone maybe for the rest of the best of 5.
Definitely. Like, obviously at this point, our scrims were so much different to like how we were Energy versus Obey. We were playing like along support and getting like triple kills either way, and then we would F6 like before the waves even spawn, and then comes to the finals and it all ends up just back to team comps rather than just smoking at level 1, because we knew what the other team knew. So unless you're gonna just pull something random out the bag, it was always gonna be like, if it was any way like scrims, it wouldn't have been as hype as it was. That's all I'm saying.
And then you guys force mid after you get pulled. How dare they even try to kill you?
I don't know why you pull a tank in that has CC like Kepri, but I'll take it.
And then Adapting goes in. He really wants to kill Twig here, and it feels like you were punishing Adapting for diving almost by not ulting
so
him.
what happens here is I say, I have ult, and he obviously hears me as ult, trusts me, and just goes in. And then I think I was about 2 or 3 mana off. It was like 1 more tick, because I used my 2, I miscalculated, and I was 1 tick of mana off. It was because I used my 2 right there to 2 him, which was like obviously a poor play. I should have just ulted him straight up.
Sorry, it's not your fault. You were punishing him for being aggressive.
Yeah, of course, punish him for being so greedy, but like here right now, I've got an XP lead for where I should be in a support. I finished my Sov, and then Twig obviously has not calculated it in his head. If I went straight hardward, sure, he would have killed me.
You also shelled as he landed.
Yeah, of course. So that's like even more prots on top of it. It's no way he was going to kill me. Yeah. And even if so, it wouldn't have been worth it, because like you see here, it's a 2 for 1 after them diving. What would it been like? A 2 for 0. Sorry, it would have been a 2 for 1, best case scenario, and
3 for
now it's a 3 for none. I'll take it.
Yeah, trying to kill the Raffer.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Not the plays
Not
from
unless
Obey.
I'm trolling, but I don't troll at Worlds.
Definitely
Only the
not.
last Worlds, whereas you may.
And this time, a much cleaner fight from you guys. Yet again, they're trying to kill Raffer. You get off the revive. Sick portal by Yaman.
That portal pretty much won that. And then the snipe won that too. And then obviously Kenneth as a free person to go on after that. But it's a nice silence by Twig, which I'm not sure if Yanis 2 would have hit. But Prime ends up the one getting punished for all this, because I'm playing a dumb character like Kepri.
Yeah. Yet again, Obey trying to kill you consistently. You're poking out Panda-like a little bit. All the setup in the world, not enough to take out Raffer.
No, it's one of those where they need to stop at this point. Like they need this voice that tells them there's another primal on me, does 15% of my health. Like he needs to do these on the carries. Like look at the HP of all the carries now, and then look at my HP, and I'm just stood there. Like,
You eating a crush. You're looking at the enemy team. You're the only one with the ultimate available, and you're like, you want to go? Obey has a pretty good engagement around the 46-minute mark in the mid lane, taking everyone off, and I call this the greatest hold ever. What's your mind going through during this whole interaction?
It was crazy. Like this fight that was happening outside, we caught Prime, but it just felt bad. Like we were going outside the Phoenix, and we were like not all together as a 5, so it just felt like an awful engagement, and it ended up happening. And then when Yamin died here, it was like you could feel like that really bad feeling in the back of your throat. Like we're relying on Emil here. Like he has to hold, and he plays this perfectly. Like he couldn't have played this better. He knew Nate had the damage, and I feel like Nate messed up going that left side. If he went the right side, he would have been in such a safer spot. He probably beats himself up about that.
And then the ultimate.
And then the ultimate for positioning, like that is perfect. And then obviously I called that I have my ult, so I 2 him. Getting rooted together was really bad. But then I get the ult off obviously, and then the 2's on Emil again. So like we're literally just shredding them. And then we position badly, and then you get the 2-man fearless. I'm screaming split up, but then we run together, which I think wouldn't have even made a difference. I don't think we could escape. And here I was about to take my headset off, and then I was like, oh shit, they can't end. You know, I was literally about to take it off, and I'm not sure what happens if you take it off. I know you're not allowed to.
Thank you so much for your time, Raffer. Before we end the video, is there any shout-outs you want to give? And tell the fans at home where they can find you on social media.
You can find me at my handles at iRaffer, just on everything, and shout out to myself for being God-given talent.
Thank you again, Raffer.
No
for your
problem.
time.
Thank you very much to Raffer for joining us and going over some of that old game. That's just a 5-minute cut, the full 25-minute video available on the SMITEPro YouTube if you want to take a look. Stay with us, though. We'll be right back with more Esports Weekly. Welcome back. The SCL started right away this Monday, and if you missed it, you missed a pretty competitive week, especially after their phenomenal showing. And by they, I mean the console scene in general, I think, gets the nod at the Midseason Invitational. To talk about the SCL, we've got SCL correspondent John Finch joining the show.
That's right.
Yet again.
Hey.
You bring a lot of, like, everyone else is like, hey, what's up? And you're like, yeah, it's me.
I love the SCL. That's why. Let's go.
It's about time. All right.
Yeah.
Well, do you agree that their performance at MSI kind of gave this scene a little bit more legitimacy?
I think so in a big way, man. I said it that day. If you hadn't been watching the SCL before, then I think MSI was a huge show for them. That there's players in there that have a ton of potential, not just within the scene itself. The scene is competitive, but clearly they can compete with the minor league on that same level as well, based on some of what Hype Unit showed us.
Yeah, I mean, Hype Unit made it farther than I think all of us thought they would.
Yes.
and really looked pretty solid, even against Armada, who ultimately beats Rival. You know the story if you watched last week's Esports Weekly.
Right.
So let's start with what we have already seen then with the standings. EU PS4 is where we will start. This was Out Cold's region, all last phase. They start off pretty well, but not as well as we kind of thought. It takes them 3 games to go over Bedtime's Calling.
Yeah, so not the full 2-0 that I think you would have expected, but if you remember Phase 1, Out Cold did always win, but it was like this. This is the way that they would win. It would be marginal at times. They would, of course, have some times where they kind of poked out and showed us some dominance. Just Lion, clearly we saw from playing at MSI, has some of the potential. We didn't just see him play in their set on that first day, but we did also see him come back play for the All-Star event as well. So
that's right.
We clearly know there's some talent here on this roster. It's not just him there, and they eventually were able to clean the game up. That's exactly how I expect that to go. Though that they have a little bit of competition there is interesting. We'll see if they can come out on top yet again.
Of course, we've also got the EU Xbox side of things, and Rival went up against Dabo's Disciples. Rival end up winning this one, but the more interesting thing to me, Finch, I don't even know if I saw it anywhere, but I was told that it's happening, and I'm going to say it even if I'm not allowed. 50-meter fly going back to Team Rival now, off of Dabo's Disciples. The trade for 50-meter fly and Dobson has happened once again. They were like this, then they were like this, and now they're like this again. They're fly back on Rival.
That is huge, right? I mean, especially because Rival won, right? So now, and they both were playing with subs. I think there was some kind of roster lock scenario they ran into because of when they timed that trade. So they both had to play without either. So now we'll be seeing them play again with that full rosters at their disposal. And Rival won, man, in this game. I think that's huge already. Davos is far and away their best competition. Obviously, they Porsche Coast on that team, their former teammate. So now they're able to play really well, even in a world where they didn't have Fly on there. I think it was Nate who stepped in for them and actually did look pretty good. So it's a pretty big deal that this team was able to win even without him. I have huge expectations for them when they're back at their full strength.
It was no compromise in the mid lane for Rival as well. And if you're looking for a mid laner, by the way, that might be the one.
I would go with that's exactly right.
He played really well.
Played really well for them on that team. He showed you why I think Anher looked so good for Dardes. He came back in and said, hey, I can do it just as well. So strong performance there from Rival. It's exactly what I would have expected for them. Dambos, though, I don't think is deterred by that.
Sure.
Once they're back sort of at their full strength, I expect them to come back and continually challenge the Rival team.
In the North American side of things, we'll start off with PS4 and what you may have missed there. Nemesis was their representative at the Midseason Invitational, and Nemesis looked very clean, I would say, up against Big Money. A little bit cleaner than really they did in Phase 1, I think, during their online play.
And I would give Nemesis a slight pass on that. This team is very storied and very strong. Jumpa, obviously, on this team, and is someone who has won before. Matt Coy is on this team as well as Zaxi. They've got a ton of talent and experience. And if here on PS4, without having been fully challenged, maybe they take a game or two off somewhere in there, I'll cut them some slack,
Yeah.
right? Because I know this is a team that can turn it on when they play up against really good teams. They didn't win at MSI, but I think they did show us they had the potential. Those games were close for a while until they eventually got away from them. So certainly we expect high things from this team. Up against big money, though, they cleaned up. It wasn't particularly close.
I did just get news, by the way, that there has been an award kind of received by North American PS4, and that's that E-Boys Gone Wild is the worst team name in any of our leagues.
Wow, I bet that was a really unanimous vote. on
Yeah,
who
it's
got
not
that award.
close. Change your team name. That sucks.
Yeah, can you guys do that?
Yeah.
Well, yes is the answer. So
Yeah,
do
it.
that. Yeah,
Terrible.
That's
yeah.
the way we would vote.
NA Xbox close us out on Monday. Hype Unit, of course, the team that everyone was excited about. Blanche Fan Club, formerly known as Heat Uprise, did give them a run for their money
As expected.
in what was Griff's sort of farewell, Viking funeral.
I think it was a pretty sick farewell for what it's worth. Griff
Yeah.
had a really good set that day. It is a bit of a bummer that we're losing him here at this point. He's a huge member for them, but I expect Hyping It to still be pretty strong even despite that.
Yeah, who are they picking up again? That's some Crimson guy that's
Yeah.
been kind of like dominating the
He's
SEL.
been like around, kind of killing it occasionally, sometimes. Yeah, so yeah, they'll probably be fine either way. So that's why I went with that headline. All the teams that made it to MSI, I think, showed us they earned those tickets. All of them coming away with a win this first week.
Very, very true. Hype Unit up against Fatal Ambition will close us off next Monday. That should be Crimson's first debut game
Right.
in the ADC role, so make sure you stay tuned all Monday long until the very end, because that should be pretty exciting. Look, Crimson, great mid laner. Are you concerned at all about him in ADC?
I am a little bit. That is a bit different, though. I mean, if the meta keeps going like it is, apparently he can play whatever he wants over there, so
true.
maybe
Just
it won't be too big a deal.
Oh my God, he's going to play Thoth ADC.
Oh, well, and he should. Thoth just got buffed. I'm down for it.
no.
What? You can't have a
I'm
problem with
feeling
that.
for the rest of the NA Xbox scene, man. I got to. That's the way it works around here. Finch, thank you very much for joining us and talking about some SCL. So at the minor league, of course, a little bit of an upset happened yesterday in the minor league. Stay tuned. We'll go over it next. Welcome back, everybody. The Smite Minor League continued, or debuted, I should say, as it is Phase 2, Week 1 yesterday. And we had some pretty interesting games to talk about, and we've got Anatoly joining us here on the set. Toly, let's start in Europe. Flashpoint was the second seed that came in. They looked pretty good at MSI, though they did end up losing right away to Hype Unit. That was without their mid laner. They did not really look that good yesterday.
No, they did not, honestly, because the fact that they also was using Mogao instead of Sibi, a little bit of roster issues between MSI transitioning into Phase 2. Great performance from Kesa, the Warchi, game number 1 on the Chernobyl, game number 3 on the Onher. Good mid control, led to a victory.
Yeah, this is one of those teams that I think everyone is going to keep an eye on for a while. I mean, Johnny, game 2 on set, gets
Phenomenal.
like 14 kills or something like that. I mean, Flashpoint, are they still a favorite? Because they were the top seed in Europe for the majority of Phase 1.
That's right. I think they went 7-1 in the first phase. Then they lost like 3 in a row, and they lost their mojo. And I think after that point, they didn't really look like the same Flashpoint at MSI. And since then, it's only the first week in Phase 2, so I'm not going to write them out quite now. Still have a lot to prove, though, moving on to Week 2.
Absolutely. And don't forget, there are 2 more teams in the minor league these days. You can go to esports.smitegame.com if you want to check out some of those new rosters. But overall, I want to take a look at the European scene. Simplicity has got to be the team to beat.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. They definitely destroyed out Cold Gaming, I think, in the last set. And it was another issue of rosters where it wasn't Dimmy playing in the solo lane. It was the ugly one, but it definitely wasn't his fault as to the lack of success. Frostiak got abused in that last set, and I think Death Panther had a great game on the Merlin.
Now, the 2 new teams, Horizon Union and Exordium, faced off. It was Horizon Union who won that in 3 games, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see them pretty shortly here. Again, rosters, if you want those, esports.smitegame.com is the place to go. Let's move on to North America, where Armada, the team that dominated, they beat the best team in the SPL coming into MSI and Rival. They lose Snoopy.
Yes.
It's Vedium subbing in for them because, of course, Snoopy goes to Luminosity. They gain Baskin back, but they still lose.
It's interesting to see that they get a better solo player, you would think, at least, as opposed to solo Troll, but they still couldn't find the victory up against Sanguine. But this time, Sanguine looked more prepared, I would say, than Armada. With Yarkor back into the mix, he wasn't there for MSI, and that's, I think, was the factor to the lack of success from Sanguine during MSI. And now that he was back, it looked like a totally different roster. Sanguine destroyed Armada, honestly.
And on the other side of things, Space Station Gaming, they really heavily struggled during Phase 1 of the minor league. They looked very, very good yesterday.
They did lose game 1, but then after that, they bounced back mentally. Game number 2, Chapo and the Thor, he was playing setup, man, sacrificing himself for Oceans on the Morrigan. A great play coming out of him in the right place at the right time, going from the SPL to the minor league without even missing a beat. In game number 3, just a lot of interesting picks, I would say, coming through from Space Station, where Chapo plays Ares jungle, Cupid middle coming out of Oceans, and it didn't seem as though Cryptic had a response.
No, that Ares jungle was a problem, I would say, at the very least, for Team Cryptic. You have Oceans now in the mid lane, Chapo back in the jungle, replacing Mask when he left for Armada. I think the Space Station roster looks significantly stronger.
As long as their comps are good, because that second game with Uzi on the Jean Kui was a good way to synergize with the Morrigan for Oceans. If they keep playing like that, I have high hopes for them in Phase 2.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is one of those teams to watch out for. Exilium and of course the Hype Unit SML squad are the new additions to the North American SML, esports.smitegame.com, if you want to take a look at those rosters. Totally, I think biggest surprise of week 1, probably Armada losing for me.
Oh, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. In terms of the way they lost, it's not the fact that I'm saying they're a much better team than Sanguine. I just think that it didn't look that way whatsoever in that set. Sanguine looked like they were much more prepared.
Yeah, it's one of those teams that you have to watch out for right now, I think. Sanguine, we were just talking about Space Station. Sanguine, another really strong team. Totally, thank you very much for joining us, talk some SML. And that brings us, of course, to the kickoff weeks of the SPL. It's going to be a blast. I'm so excited to see the top-end teams really compete on this mid-season patch, our first opportunity to see how they adjust to all the changes that they've made. But don't forget that all of these standings roll over from Phase 1. So Space Station Obey Alliance, formerly Trifecta, and LG all have their work cut out for them. Even SK is still a little bit a ways away, but not too far. SK Gaming, a team flying under the radar a little bit right now. No one's really talking about them. That's a good squad. Keep your eye out for them. Keep your eye out as well for our SPL debut here in Phase 2. Dignitas versus Space Station Gaming will kick us off tomorrow, and then Space Station finds off their second part of their doubleheader up against Splice on Friday. So make sure you tune in for all of that. It's going to be a great 2 sets as we dip our toes back into the SPL. Bit of a note for you guys, by the way, a little bit of a correction on those graphics. It is 1 o'clock broadcast start times for both Thursday and Friday, I do believe. But make sure you just follow SMITEPro on Twitter. They'll have the updated schedule for you. Apologies for that, but hopefully you'll be there for us when we kick off the SPL starting tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. As always, you can get in contact with me on Twitter @Agro, and hopefully we'll see you next time here on Esports Weekly.